Welcome back, everybody. This next subject has been talked about at this summit for many years. I remember probably 6 years ago, I asked the audience how many people own cryptocurrency, and just a few people raised their hands. Next year, it like tripled, and then it tripled the following year. So not so much people's faith in cryptocurrency, but probably in blockchain. And one of the attendees actually went and bought some when I first brought it up, and then came back a few years later and wanted to thank me for his new backyard. So anyway, our next session, the plenary panel on blockchain. Take it away, Nick. You're on mute, Nick.
Thank you, Wink, and welcome back, everybody. I am delighted to kick off our plenary session on blockchain in supply chain. So, as Wink mentioned, that we started talking about blockchain almost 6 years ago. We, at the center at the University of Southern California, with the engineering school and the Marshall School of Business, we realized that the traditional supply chain and its fragmentation of data and the siloed and islands of automations has created huge inefficiencies across the supply chain. We thought there is a tremendous opportunity for us to use this platform of blockchain in a very reasonable way to create that integration and sort of a transparency that we've been seeking for decades. With that, I am very proud to have an esteemed panel. Each of the panelists will take a few minutes to not only introduce themselves, but also they will give you a background about blockchain from their perspective within that specific applications and industry. So we have Aaron Lieber joining us, Aljosja, Michael, Dan, and thank you all for being here this morning. Let's get started. I will go for the geographic distance. Aljosja, since you are, looks like at least appear to be you the furthest from the Los Angeles. So let's get you kicked off. Give us a quick your introduction about yourself as well as the blockchain and your perspective.
Thank you, Nick. I hope next year I have the possibility again to be in LA. I was really looking forward to it this year, but unfortunately. My name is Aljosja Beije. Together with Nick and Bhaskar Krishnamachari, we co-authored the book on blockchain and supply chain management. I've been in the blockchain space for, I would say, since 2015. I'm currently director of BlockLab. BlockLab is a 100% subsidiary of the Port of Rotterdam. We build blockchain solutions for logistics and energy. And as the name already implies, we started in 2016. So we started really with a lab. But that lab has progressed dramatically over the last couple of years. And it has, I think, pretty well kept up with the development of the blockchain industry as such, going from, as Wing mentioned, cryptocurrency to, I would say, real serious solutions. I still remember in 2016 and 2017 having to explain to people what it was and how it technically works and whether they can print their own money and all these kind of questions. I think the questions I get right now is okay, what's in it for me? What's the business case? Why would I use blockchain? I think for both the areas that we work on, both logistics and energy, I think we have demonstrated some extremely interesting projects and also results. Last week, there was a press release picked up by Bloomberg, but also by many other big agencies, when we launched our first product blockchain product for energy together with Standard & Poor in the port of Rotterdam. It's energy. You could still argue it's still logistics because energy has to go from one place to another place. A peer-to-peer trading solution showing clear business case, 11% reduction in electricity costs for users. And that kind of mimics or mirrors very well the results that we obtained in our on the logistics side. We've been working on Deliver for some time. We gradually are increasing the number of pilots we are doing. And there we see that clients save up to 27 euros per TU on purely administrative costs. And that's one single client. If you imagine that on a global supply chain, it takes 29 parties to get a container from A to B, you can really start to think about what the cost savings are on a supply chain basis. Another client showed they were not really interested in the cost per TU, but they wanted to know how much does it matter for us in terms of savings as per the cost of our cargo. And they came up with 2.5% of the cost of cargo because, and for them it was quite significant amounts of money. So I think the whole discussion from technology to business case is a very clear one. Of course, we are quite fortunate. As a lab, we can also work on really like I would say the bleeding edge cases. And we see some very interesting developments there in terms of tokenization, which are actually already leading to proposals to change the Dutch civil code, and also in the area of new protocols, and in particular baseline, for example, I'm very enthusiastic about. So, and I think blockchain is here to stay. We have TradeLens, we have Comgo, we have VACT. Marco Polo, all these platforms are out there. They're working, and I'm not even mentioning the blockchain platforms that are used in China. So it's here to stay, and it's going to grow, and it's staying a very exciting area, I would say.
Aljosja, thank you very much. You brought up some interesting point that I'm looking forward to get into a little bit more detail. And
sorry about that, I was muted. Yeah, Ann McCormick, I'm part of the global trade and supply chain product team. We've been looking at blockchain for a number of years. Have partnered with Microsoft, Michael, and also Dan on Marco Polo. What we're really looking at from a lens perspective is our clients run the gamut of industries, and they're looking for solutions that kind of tie, you know, from a supply chain or trade perspective, getting the paper out, getting the costs out of the supply chain, the ability to move the goods faster, to track the goods faster, and then to settle the from a financial perspective. So we've really looked at that end to end, and still continue to see some exciting opportunities. Certainly that the pandemic brought really to the forefront of tracking goods, the health of the supply chain itself. So we're really looking across the spectrum of a solution like blockchain that can leverage other technologies, but in and of itself, create some of the gaps that we've seen in supply chain of not having really full visibility of the goods and the ability to track and trace.
Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. Let's go to Dan.
Hi, my name's Dan Juliano. I work for a company called TradeIx. We're a software company that builds applications for banks and their corporates to be able to transact more efficiently, more digitally than in the past. And we're doing this, building this on a blockchain technology. So we took this kind of foundational solution, blockchain, and kind of built solutions on top of it to kind of transform business. We're also if you've read about or if you're following the market, as I think Ann and others have mentioned, is that there's a network called the Marco Polo Network. The Marco Polo Network was a collaboration between a number of banks back about 4 years ago now, when they were trying to figure out, how does blockchain really work? How does it transform my business? Does it really provide what everyone's talking about? So what they did was they performed a consortium of banks and they started playing around with the technology. Now, blockchain is itself doesn't really do much, right? So you have to have something on top of it. So that's where they brought TradeIx in to build some applications that can work with blockchain to be able to then test out these hypotheses and see if it doesn't really provide the value, the transparency, the security, and all the things that the promise of blockchain is. So we went through a lengthy proof of concept and analysis of the solution, and came to the conclusion that yes, there is this value. And then we went to now going to production mode, where we build out these applications and now deploying them with partners like Bank of America and Microsoft and others to be able to provide this promise of what blockchain can deliver to buyers, banks, and providing transparency, security, et cetera.
Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate it. Since you brought up working with banks and then the Microsoft, so let's move to Michael. Give us a perspective from the Microsoft on the backgrounds of obviously the blockchain, but also how you guys are playing in this space.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. Good day, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Michael Glaros. I'm a program manager with the Azure Global Commercial Industry team. And really one of our charters is trying to look at all of this emerging technology we're seeing come at this rapid pace. So you have blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing, and to really make sense of it all for our customers, especially those in industries like financial services or consumer goods or retail, especially where you see sort of this intersection between as Ann brought up, some of these legacy paper-based, transactions, which were severely impacted during this time of COVID, where you literally had goods sitting at docks because people were rightly concerned about actually handling bills of lading and transferring those over to one another. So you have this trend towards digitization. Then, as Dan mentioned, you have all of these parties coming together trying to figure out how to make sense of it all. There's complicated networking considerations, there's new programming languages and constructs, there's multi-party, which opens up kind of a can of worms around, how do you protect confidential, IP in these kinds of computing constructs. And so really our job is really partnering with organizations like TradeIx and with banks like Bank of America and large corporates to figure out how to triangulate between honoring their security and compliance obligations, advancing business, taking advantage of innovation, but stitching it all together, because as Aljosja mentioned, it's here to stay. All of these new techniques and this new technology just keeps growing, and it just keeps proliferating, and it actually keeps combining with one another. So it's not just about having one specific solution, whether it's blockchain or machine learning or AI, but how do you actually bring all these ingredients together to really recast and really rethink? One of the things our CEO, Satya Nadella, says is every company now is a software company. And so as companies really start to embrace data and insights and software in this manner, how do we sort of take the best ideas that the panel here today really represents and fuse it and fashion it in a way that can really sort of meet the promises and needs of doing business in a trustworthy manner, yet doing things very gracefully and agilely to respond to whether it's a pandemic or new trade trends or new legislation in a very seamless fashion to keep business running.
Michael, thank you. Great perspective. Last but not least, Aaron.
Very good. Good day, everyone. So my name is Aaron Lieber. I work at IBM, and I've been leading product management for the thing that is now called TradeLens since its inception a few years ago. And I've been in the blockchain and trade space slightly shorter time than Aljosja. I joined in, I'd say, March of 2016. So over that time, I think, what we've seen through our partnership with Maersk and, and the other carriers we're working with, we started out trying to take a very holistic approach to deal with the big picture problems. So, all of the paper and trade, all of the communications inefficiencies that Nick mentioned during his opener. And I think, our thinking, at least for what we're doing, because we've moved beyond the pilot stage and we're bringing product to market now and selling it to clients. So in terms of blockchain and the supply chain, we're really applying that technology specifically to the problem of electronic bill of lading. So we think, we're using it in other areas, but really we think, we at IBM and Maersk think that that's probably the area where we have the chance to make the biggest impact. So in terms of how that journey has gone, we launched our pilot product over the summer. We ran about 150 transactions with no paper guardrails whatsoever. So these were not trade finance transactions. These were transactions where the shipper transfers the bill to the consignee upon receipt of payment. So it's one of the scenarios out there. We've launched that product as a limited availability commercial product. So we have, we're out of pilot mode. We have actual paying customers on that now. And in parallel, we are exploring additional scenarios with major banks in the trade finance space. So, we're looking at an electronic bill of lading that works, for a letter of credit or for a bank payment obligation. Now, what we're running into, realistically, blockchain is a perfect technology to solve that problem. I think it's, if you look at it, cryptocurrency is just the transfer of a digital asset, and a bill of lading is really not a whole lot more complicated than that from a pure technology standpoint. What we're finding is that it's really a challenge of dealing with legal frameworks and international legal frameworks, and then it's a stakeholder management challenge. It's simply a big ecosystem with lots of different types of stakeholders. So so our approach, and this is it's a matter of public record in terms of our filings with the FMC. We are working with Maersk, MSC, CMA, and some other shipping lines to bring an electronic bill of lading product to market together. And what we're hoping is that, introducing something that works consistently across multiple major container lines will help kind of break what I see as, a longstanding stalemate in the, in this space. Like, it seems to me like it's hard to be the one who goes first, given that you've got so many banks involved in trade finance, so many governments involved, just so many stakeholders. So I'm hoping that we've hit that critical tipping point, and yeah, we'll see how the rest of the year plays out. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and I appreciate the perspective. I think there's a diverse perspective from the panelists, from their unique vantage point about Michael speaking the vision of every company is a software company, to Aljosja really quantifying the application of cost, how we can remove and improve the cost structures, to Aaron, your ability to really focusing on electronic bill of lading, to Anne and Dan. You guys are working in the trade finance space and the banking. I think it was a great mix of things. What I'm looking at it, I was reflecting last night in preparations for today and tomorrow. And suddenly one of the things I was looking at it the first time when we had an opportunity to work with Department of Commerce under previous President Obama, where Secretary Pritzker had mentioned the digital footprint, digital infrastructure, the digital supply chain needs to be the priority of the future supply chain. So her vision at that point was, how do we really drive the future trade agreement underpinned by digital platforms? Very ambitious vision, I must say. Suddenly there is a change of administration, and I think that vision has not really carried forward at that level of depth. Let me ask this question. And when I was reflecting this again last night, is World Wide Web. Think about COVID. We are today living in this pandemic, and I was thinking about what would have happened if we did not have the internet. the World Wide Web access and these capabilities that we're living in today, what would have happened to the humanity? And I'm not talking about we need to go back to 50 years. I'm just talking about 15 years, right? And that made me realize, let's draw some parallel, and I would love for you guys to give me your perspective. How do we get to where World Wide Web today is driving our way of life to where blockchain, and I don't want to just limit this conversation with blockchain, but the emerging technologies, Michael. We spoke about the AI, ML, big data analytics capabilities, IoT integrations, and all, but emerging technology, and obviously blockchain is the underpin also. How do we get to that stage? Or am I too far off in that vision? Let's start with you, Michael, and then we'll go around the panel.
No, Nick, I think it's very well said. I think it really, there's just a lot of learning by doing that has to take place. And I think that's what's been so exciting about one of the things that blockchain in particular really kind of unleashed is you had startups, you had sort of enthusiasts, you had large enterprises, all kind of coming together in the spirit of experimentation. And I think the big theme that underpins it, Nick, to your direct question is collaboration. I think if we can continue to collaborate, there's definitely this trend towards open source. There's definitely a trend towards more standardization. Especially these are things that cloud computing, certainly facilitates. I mean, all of us being forced into this remote working, I think it certainly facilitates more collaboration in some respects. We don't necessarily have to lose the travel time. But I think if that can keep going, if we can continue to harness that ability to collaborate and iterate and share learnings, obviously we have to do it in a way that's respectful of IP and contributions as appropriate. But to the extent, like for instance, the great work that Aaron's doing with TradeLens, I feel like there's a lot of learnings around electronic bill of lading that can then be fed into the Interwork Alliance that is also looking to do something similar. So now you can get this feedback loop going where different projects can surface requirements or blockers, maybe because they're working in specific territories and markets, or they're working in specific industries as we're doing, and then to try and figure out what's the shared purpose and the common good, where certainly there'll always be kind of this backplane of competition, but then where possible, we can surface these things for kind of the betterment of all of these projects and technologies.
Thank you, Michael. So Dan and Ann, I think the banking, suddenly industry were smart folks that they realize that instead of fighting the force of getting rid of the intermediary, that they actually decided to become proactive. So not only I want you to sort of answer my previous question, which was how do we get to what the World Wide Web, internet phenomena that we are now living in, to this emerging technology that becomes the way what we used to now with this. But give me the perspective an audience would greatly appreciate about the trade finance and the banking with the similar perspective answering the previous question of mine.
So yeah, it's a great question, and Michael brought up some really key points, and one around just the collaboration was key. One of the things when we looked at blockchain initially from a banking perspective is, and I think a lot of the banks, thought in these terms, is there were a lot of consortiums happening. There were, you were asked to kind of participate in a lot of projects and initiatives, and you have to kind of pick your priorities. And what I think we looked at for sure was solutions that had that interoperability, right? Because you're basically betting on who's gonna be the first to market, who's gonna win the race. So that collaborative piece of it, I think, was key. Now, when it first started, what was interesting was all of the focus, whether I was talking to a treasurer or an IT person, it was all about the technology. Oh, this is cool technology, that kind of thing. And then it really has turned now into the solutioning side of it, and the technology works, but now you got to make the solutions work, and part of that is that adoption. And so I think the key is going to, and then Michael also hit on a couple of other pieces to this. At the same time blockchain is emerging, AI really started to get legs and get some very interesting use cases. I mean, even robotics, you know, it serves its purpose. So you had a number of emerging technologies happening, and they all actually worked and played together really well with blockchain, because then you can utilize those technologies. And what blockchain did, I think certainly from a trade finance perspective, and what we were looking at from the bank, is the collaboration in supply chain. Multiple banks, I heard, you know, that was, as Aaron was saying, there's a lot of banks out there in supply chain, but the key is, and you're all working with the same clients, and the key is that collaboration. And what blockchain brought in the ledger is the ability to share that information and be able to, you know, track items. And I also want to put some focus on the fact that, you know, we see this, and governments do as well, as an ability to get some fraud out of the system. So you're mitigating risks at the same time. So are we there yet? No. But does it still have a lot of legs around the ability to solve those problems based on adoption and where it's going now?
Thank you. And then?
Michael and Ann have hit a lot of the points that I would have mentioned, but one is Ann mentioned interoperability. I mean, take in trade finance, you know, as goods are being shipped around the world, the ability for banks and to finance, just think of what Aaron's doing, e-bills, right? E-bills are a very important part of trade finance, but yet data sitting on a trade lens, data infrastructure, trying to integrate to a Marco Polo infrastructure is very hard right now. The interoperability is not there. So for us to be the internet, interoperability has to be paramount. Standards need to be set, and the ability to share data. We will never get there if we don't collaborate and start working more closely together on standards, because if it's going to be big, all we're dealing is building bigger silos, right? It's just more people collaborating, and I have bigger silos than I had before. So interoperability is critical for us to ever achieve the World Wide Web concept with blockchain.
And brilliantly stated, and I'll actually come back to the standards. The 4 things that I had actually written down before I posed that question to you, as soon as Aljosja has an opportunity to answer the question. And Aaron, I'm not sure, I've not, so you and Aljosja next. So why don't we start with you, Aljosja?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I would like to start also with a kind of historic perspective. Cryptocurrency became hot, what was it, 2015? We currently have a president of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, who's a big fan of central digital currency. The whole idea of central digital currency would not have started without the foundational work done on Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I think that's moving extremely fast in that respect. I also agree with what Ann said, and that's where you now have all these technologies coming together, and it's a perfect storm. It's not only do we have mature technologies when it comes to AI or blockchain, but we also have this huge abundance of data. I mean, when I went to university, AI was there, but it was a joke. We didn't have any data. We couldn't train the machines. Now, you know, you're drowning almost in a sea of data in order to really train AI agents. And we've also working on some interesting integrations where we use AI agents for trading energy with a blockchain solution. So we also see these technologies now coming together. Yeah, this thing about interoperability, that is really yeah, something that's very dear to my heart. When we started out with Deliver, that is a platform for interoperability. And also the topic of the electronic bill of lading. That's very interesting to put it on the blockchain, but it gets more interesting if you put it on a blockchain in a trustless environment. And that's when you have a negotiable e-bill of lading. And that's, for example, what we work on with IWA in really trying to define a standard that allows you to transfer ownership in a digital way. And that's it started out really as a research project and a collaboration with the port authorities in Singapore. But it is now to a point where, together with the Dutch Association of Banks, the Dutch Ministry of Justice, the Dutch Federation of Importers and Exporters, we are working on a change in the Dutch civil code to allow transfer of ownership in a digital way. Because that's the biggest stumbling block. It's not technology. We can do the tokens, we can do identity. It's this legal thing that's really a big challenge, and that's what we see. And that's why we're very fortunate to work with Singapore, with the Singaporeese government, and to have two governments that are like, this needs to change. This is so not 2020.
Aljosja, a great point, and you know my work with Singapore and and the PSA, so I think that's a great point. We'll come back to that. Aaron.
So I'll just follow up to what Aljosja said. I think probably, in terms of that legal framework, and just interoperability. I mean, we need interoperability on the technology side, but also on the business and the legal side. And to the point about Singapore, the UN Citral model law for electronic transmissible records, that's probably the most interesting thing that I've seen in this space, well, since I got into the space. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the absence of that kind of legislation, all of the blockchain platforms that are out there, anyone who tries to do EBL has to paper over the gaps in international law with contract law. And it's messy and it's hard to scale. I mean, I know that I'm in it every day. So I think the initiatives being driven out of Singapore through the UN, I really hope that's successful, because I think that's probably the single most transformative thing in the space. With that being said, on the topic of interoperability, I mean, we hear this all the time, and realistically, I think there's good work being done. So I know that the shipping lines have stood up the Digital Container Shipping Association. We're trying to adopt the standards that come out of that group. At the same time, we're trying to stay as close to the legacy standards out of CFACT as possible. I mean, in general, what we're seeing on the standards and interoperability front is that there is no magic. Somebody does have to sit down and define what are the elements that make up a bill of lading. What's the set of business objects that we agree on in order to transact electronically, and it's just hard work. I mean, there's no way around it. So I have yet to see a simple self-describing technology solution that really addresses that problem. So so our approach is to engage in those discussions, to promote discussions about standards, adopt whatever we can, and and we'll work with anyone. And we want to see this successful, and we can't imagine that we'll be the only player in the space. It's too important.
So I think that's interesting perspective. And so I think what I hear, the common theme, which was interoperability, the standards, right? Those two sort of a resonant theme that came from your perspective. What I had written down last night as I was judging was the standard was one of them, certainly. I also thought the scale, meaning how do we really, in order for this to really become the way of life, would be that it has to have a massive scalability approach. And I want to gain this perspective on my second point that I made the note on. The inflection point I thought the COVID would create the catalytic event, which it has. And I think at the beginning of our kickoff of this summit, we talked about it, how we believe the digitization is going to drive the future of supply chain post-COVID. Do you think this is going to be used to create a greater adaptability of this new digital emerging technology platforms? And that's question one. And B, are these new platforms and adaptability will be bifurcated into two segments? One, rich multinational Fortune 100, 500 companies, and then you have a second group that is small to mid-sized companies that they would not know what to do and how to make the head and tail out of this. So the question is, scalability, A, is this really COVID will help us? And B, will it discriminate these two chunks that we described? Who wants to go? Michael, why don't we start with you?
Happy to, Nick. I think the topic of discrimination, let's take that one first. I think it's a fascinating area. One of the things we've been doing at Microsoft is really trying to invest very heavily in emerging markets and do a lot of work, especially with SME projects in Latin America and Africa, to really understand and get close to sort of the not only the emerging economies there, but the entrepreneurs that are leading a lot of the fintech innovations. Because in those types of markets, you sort of have the twin factors of not only sort of the COVID and sort of either entering or emerging from lockdown economies, but also you're simultaneously trying to build a lot of greenfield capabilities, because we've seen a lot of global banks, de-risk from those markets. And so you're trying to navigate, sort of global compliance, global trade, COVID shutdown, and then certainly in the case of Africa, you've got the African Continental Free Trade Agreement coming online, which is now by just in terms of sheer geography, sort of the largest area. So I think that the way to sort of check against the discrimination that you reference is, I think it's up to big companies like us to really invest in getting close to those entrepreneurs, getting close to those building the trading systems of tomorrow, regardless of what their home market is, and then tying that back to standards, coming with a way to make sure that, if there are compliance or privacy or security standards, those should be designed in and those should be part of the build process. So it's not an after the fact that, we built something that only works in one market because it's only factored that local legislation in, but it's something where, an entrepreneur in Nigeria or in Indonesia can compete globally because they've actually had that ability to build in those frameworks and those techs, and we've actually lowered the cost of entry because cloud computing becomes more ubiquitous, access to data becomes easier and better, and now then you can have sort of fintech innovation come at you from anywhere in the world, and then it opens up these large new markets where we're seeing kind of this rise in the emerging middle class. So I think that's one piece. I think it's got to also to your point about scalability, I think it's all too tempting to sort of take these promises at face value of things like, well, blockchain is more secure because it's got this cryptographic proof of identity and security. Yes, however, as a security professional, that's kind of my background. We talk in terms of the classic trinity of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And availability lies, that goes right at the heart of sort of the scalability issue. If network nodes start to fail or they get compromised, or you have sort of the 51% attack where you get too much of an actor taking over too many nodes, that availability becomes a very clear and present security threat and risk. And so the way to really mitigate that is thinking through good old-fashioned risk management. How do I actually make sure that I understand, where my node is operating, who's operating it? Yes, decentralization is a very interesting capability and brings lots of promise, but you still have to have some good old-fashioned cybersecurity fundamentals around vulnerability management and understanding your network attack surface and being able to piece those things together so that you have the ability to walk from the emerging legal standards and some of the trends that Aljosja mentioned, especially that are being pushed in a place like Singapore, but being able to then translate those into technical controls that can then reemerge as standards that anybody anywhere in the world can pragmatically take advantage of and build toward to actually deliver on that promise of scalability.
Well, and also, Michael, you know this too, is when you're delivering products to corporates, right? Scalability, a lot of times you say you're a blockchain solution, they get all worried, like, what do I have to do for an IT infrastructure? How am I going to stand this up? What do I have? Okay, from a tech provider, right? We're putting it all behind the scenes. For them, it's a web browser, right? They're not, behind the scenes is all that heavy lifting infrastructure, leveraging Microsoft's ability to quickly deploy solutions around the world and scale it, right? So it's really a combination of the providers of tech, like my company, to make it simple and easy for anyone to use, no matter how big or small you are. And if you're a big company, you want to take more control over your data and more control over the application, you can. That's what blockchain provides, is I could be very decentralized, distributed data and applications so they can control it. But for the smaller guys who just want to transact, I can literally just stand it up and they log in a web browser and it's done. So I can make it scalable, I can make it simple, I can make it sophisticated depending on, and that's what's really great about this collaboration and what partners like Bank of America, Microsoft, and others bring, is that we can make it as simple or as complex as the end users need it to be.
So then let me follow up with that thought. Can that simplistic view exist, to Michael's point, in other part of the world, other continents? So if I'm looking at from the Africa perspective, is it simple enough for me to actually institute those simple to use interfaces, even if I'm in there in a very low resource environment? Is that true?
Yeah, well, yes, it depends. I think Michael took two approaches there. One was, if you want as a company in that region of the world to develop on these technologies, right, there is the ability to do that more easily. But as a provider of solutions that corporates can use, yes, it does. I don't care if the supplier is sitting in California or he's sitting in South Africa or sitting in Turkey. It doesn't matter, right? He could be anywhere in the world as long as he has access to a browser, right? And he can with a very thin client, he can basically be able to transact with his corporates all over the world digitally without having to send paper or to learn about blockchain or how do I deal with this infrastructure. Yes, it is meant to be a very simple front-end experience for the users that need it to be that way. And for the more sophisticated users, we could make it where they control it and run it themselves. But for most of those companies, I'd say 90% or more, it'll just be a web, they will have no idea what the back end even is.
I'll just chime in and say that absolutely meshes with our experience in the market. I mean, we're finding, even with very large companies, we have an API first integration strategy. Realistically, even the big companies are just using the UI, and it's, from our point of view, getting scale means making it easy to log into the UI, making it easy to transact, keeping the pricing model simple and bite-sized so there are low barriers to entry. And realistically, our biggest challenge, going back to the legal side, is getting people to sign up to the contractual framework that replaces the amazingly outdated international law. That's the biggest barrier to entry from our standpoint.
And from a bank perspective, where we see the opportunity, particularly what you hit on, Nick, with the discrimination side of this, is that this provides us the ability to go much further down market in some of our supply chain financing solutions. So some of that smaller tail spend, that is your smaller suppliers, your SMEs, that these types of solutions that automate and take cost out of your networks and your infrastructure help us to have the ability to go much further down the supply chain to, frankly, those suppliers that probably need financing at more competitive rates than they would normally get just on their own in the market. It provides them the ability to adopt these types of solutions through just using the user interface on a blockchain, but the ability to onboard them much more streamlined and cost effectively, so that you're actually overall helping the supply chain by putting health and resiliency much further down into a buyer's supply chain.
Great point, Ann. So let's talk about one of the common theme that we spoke earlier about the standards, right? China announced last year about Digital 2035, where they will actually not only create the standards for the blockchain, but standards for the digital platforms, right? There is a huge push on physical infrastructure, which they spend over $1.3 trillion on what we call the OBOR, One Belt, One Road initiative, right? So you see the even intermodal connecting into Aljosja in your world, coming, the stack trains coming in from Xi'an to Netherlands, for example. So on layer on that is the digital standards. Do you think the Western democracies have lost that appetite of collaborations? We talked about it. And do you think that China has really found a solution for coming up with the standards beforehand?
That's a very good question. I think when we start looking on a global scale and we start looking at I would say the centers of power. I would say you got the European Union, you got China, you got the US, you got Russia, and I'm quite sure that each of these blocks will want to remain sovereign. Just like we talked earlier about interoperability, I think what we will see is that there needs to be kind of interoperability between these various blocks, what they create. I doubt, especially under the current political conditions, that either the EU or the US will ever adopt Chinese standards. I also think that other blocks or countries like South Korea or Singapore that are extremely advanced when it comes to technology, they will not. They would like to be able to interoperate with systems from all kinds of different countries, but I think the standardization will be on the interoperability part, and I don't think we're going to see this one blockchain to rule them all or one technology to rule them all. That's at least my point of view of it.
Right, Aaron, how your thoughts?
So for starters, I do think that's true. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of standards activity, frankly, coming out of the EU, and we're participating in a great deal of that. Singapore's been driving as well, and I think Aljosja's comments on the global political environment right now, and just the power politics behind that. I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, from our standpoint, I think there are going to be multiple solutions in this space. And, and from, to get really specifically into a use case, I mean, I think if we've got a relatively harmonized legal framework, then I don't see any reason at all that we shouldn't be able to, transfer an electronic bill of lading from someone on the TradeLens network to someone using another network. I mean, that's a use case that we have to anticipate. And, and realistically, it means, standards and cooperation on multiple fronts. So I agree with what he said. Made sense to me.
Dan, your perspective on this subject as a large company that you are hosting, is the standard critical issues, and is your strategy and global penetration of what you guys are planning to do, that every company is a software company, would change that, where the standard comes from and what that look like?
I think you were asking Michael that, right?
Yeah, Michael, sorry.
No worries, no worries. So our position, Nick, tends to be really meeting customers where they live with respect to what standards they have. So is someone that operates, or a company that operates, global cloud infrastructure, we really have to look at each emerging standard and kind of meet them all. So for us, when we think back to the release of the Global Data Privacy Directive out of the EU, that became sort of our new high bar. So regardless of where in the world we operated, we really found that it was instrumental to adopt that framework with respect to handling data privacy. And that kind of set the new standard for us globally in terms of how we thought about the identification of personal information, the ability to honor a request for right to be forgotten, and so forth. And I think it's the same. I liked Aljosja's point about sort of these different multi-regional blocks emerging with their own set of standards, and then it has to be interoperable. I think, look, tensions are going to come and go. I think one of the interesting stats I read the other day, I believe it was in Bloomberg, is that despite all of the US drive for bilateral trade agreements and tariffs, the trade deficit continues to grow. So we're still continuing to import in this country, regardless of all of this external bluster about tariffs and bilateral agreements, undercutting, things like Trans-Pacific and so forth. So I think those tensions are going to ebb and flow, but I think sort of interoperability from a standards perspective, from a legal perspective, and then just the fact that you're going to have sort of this continuing globalization of business, even though there are some hiccups, but I think the overarching trend towards increased digitization, the ability to constantly surface and find new markets and want to sell through those, and to have global providers and partners that can come along with you on that journey. I think that's kind of sort of the far-reaching trend that will ultimately, what it means for companies like us is we really have to then do the legwork and sort of honor all standards in order to meet customers in all markets.
Great point. And let me just get the quick perspective, Dan, from you being a sort of a software provider. It's a service, business. Do you see that being the challenge of creating multiple, these sort of a now bigger islands of automations and then connecting them and worrying about those changes along the way depends on the trade wind?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just like, we deal with banks and corporates all over the world. They have different jurisdictions, different legal structures. Just like a bank who has to deal with their corporate clients all over the world, we have the same issue, is that corporates in China and corporates in the United States, Latin America, all have different rules and legal structures and digital, I can provide a digital signature, I can't, everything. So all the standards from how trade is conducted, the legal documents, what's perfection, all those things have to be contemplated in the application, which makes it really, really hard to get things like you talk about the World Wide Web, which is, one standard of communication versus all these big silos you need to deal with. It's very hard from a software provider. And that's also why aren't products released? Because we're a global world. I mean, everything's global, right? You can't just work in the United States, and especially in trade. So it takes a long time to have a solution that can meet all the needs. I'm sure Aaron deals with this all the time with shipping, right? It's to meet all the needs of the corporates around the world. It is really hard, but conflicting standards, conflicting legal infrastructures. It makes it really hard to release products fast to market and scale, because we have to deal with all these ongoing issues.
I got to pile on for a second, because we talk about interoperability, we talk about standards, and what that means for me as a software provider is basically I have to support everyone's standard, because we can't. There's no agreement on one standard to rule them all. I mean, I think with the web, we had W3C, and then we had credit card payments took off, and that made it so much easier. In this space, everybody's leading with a new standards initiative. And us on the technology side, we just have to implement all of them. It's just a lot of work.
Indeed. So I think we're trying to find the better mousetrap with a lot of the legacy thinking of creating sort of a optimized solution, because I don't think we'll ultimately, the true potentiality that this solutions, the emerging technology can provide, being integrated, if we were to sort of harmonize as a global community, I at least in my view, and do you agree, that we will not be able to see that, at least in the near future? So let's talk about, there was a question from Liz Franco about the cybersecurity and IT-led solutions. I know 15 years ago, if you had spoken in a boardroom about them moving my data into the cloud, they would have chased you out with a baseball bat. Right now, we're living in the cloud. Michael, have we come to the point now that cloud is the norm, and that there is a concept of security that is really synonymous to being in the cloud?
I mean, I think so, Nick. I mean, I always want to be cautious about sort of declaring something the norm, but I think your point's a good one, and I think it's really been looking at things like this adoption of standards, right? So the fact that I can just speak for about Azure that I'm most familiar with is we've built an exhaustive compliance program where we looked around the world, we figured out what certifications we had to go get. And then to Aaron's point, it was just this legwork and pounding the pavement and constantly keeping those standards fresh, going through audit after audit, sharing those results, and really winning kind of over one boardroom at a time to say, if you're in healthcare, if you're in financial services, if you're in energy, give us the relevant standards. We'll translate those to requirements. We'll be very transparent. And then just really making it a partnership approach and not realizing that, it's not going to be kind of an all or nothing. I think too, then tying this back to COVID, folks realizing that it's going to be increasingly hard to get your hands on hardware. And by the way, why would you want to in this environment where, contactless has become, contactless everything from pizza to, server delivery is kind of becoming this norm here. And so why would you want to put your staff at risk going to a data center, dealing with loading docks, dealing with mechanical breakdowns and reordering when, look, all of this is kind of utility compute. And I think too, just like with, the revolution in mobile telephony has changed the way we think about kind of telecommunications. Same thing is now happening in cloud, where now there's this expectation that I can go rent database, I can go rent application computing power, I can turn it on off as needed, all done from a browser with a reliable internet connection. But then the hard work is still to make sure for us at Microsoft to make sure that we listen to customers, we take on new requirements, we iterate, we feedback, and we be very, very transparent, because it can go the other way at a moment's notice. All it takes is one massive, cyber breach or a string of those or a string of failures. I know every time we have, let's say, a release that gets away from us, and I mean, Twitter's on it in a half a second. Oh, what's wrong with Azure App Service? And Twitter's all aflame. Your reputation is really only as good as your last transaction. And so if you're not constantly diligently manning the logs, doing the kind of the blocking and tackling of keeping your eyes on the ball, it's very, very easy to then lose all of that momentum in no time.
Thank you, Michael. So let me actually, we have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes rather. So I want to actually create this hypothetical scenario. I am a small to mid-sized company. I'm devastated with the disruption due to the COVID. And I hear, tuning into this summit, finding about the digitizations, digital supply chain, post-COVID world will be very different. I'm frightened. And I'm now hearing all of you guys as an experts on the blockchain and emerging technology. Where's my first step, and how do I get onto this journey? Let's start, Michael, since you spoke last, we'll go in a horn. What do I need to do? Let's go on with you.
Sure. I think it actually starts with, good old fashioned asset management. Take stock of what's important and then figure out if there's a way to replicate that digitally. So if you can really just say, hey, these are my 2 or 3 most critical business processes, and then these are how they can, and even if it's something as simplistic as just, converting it from paper to Word doc to, put it in a OneDrive somewhere, something very, very simplistic like that, to just take that first step. And then to Dan and Aaron's point, then you can start to really say, wow, there's these utilities now that I can just engage with a web browser, with a phone. But I think it's really, really critical for folks now more than ever to just really start with that concept of what are the essential assets you need to run your business, and can I access those, paper, phone, computer, network, what are the different pathways I can get to? So if I constantly get in this cycle of sort of lockdown and opening, at least I'm not cut off from the essential things I need to run my business.
Excellent. Aljosja, what do I need to do?
Yeah, I think if you look at what happened with COVID-19 and especially how it impacted small and medium-sized companies, one of the things that I was really surprised about was how surprised they were that it was actually possible to continue the company without everybody coming to the office. We spoke to a number of smaller companies, And they said, yeah, we were so surprised. Everything went smooth, and yeah, there were some small hiccups, but in the end, the work gets done. And so I think the most important question a small company should ask themselves is, why didn't you do it before? What was the reason that was stopping you? I think that is in most of the cases is quite conservative management. If I don't see you, I don't know whether you're working. And what you see now is that there's a kind of shift towards I don't care when you work as long as it's done. That's how for example, okay, we are a tech company, but that is how I run my tech company. And we started with that years before COVID broke out, because I'm not going to gauge somebody productivity by clocking his hours. A programmer can have a bad day or can have a brilliant day and write beautiful code in 1 hour, and that's going to save other people two weeks of work. So I think before starting to think about technology, etc., I think about why did it take so long, or why did it have to be COVID and something that's actually very negative in order to start exploring digitization.
Thank you, Aljosja. Aaron, let's just go to you quickly, 1 minute. What are the steps that we can take?
So I think, in the spirit of collaboration, I think the single most important step that a small company can take is talk to your suppliers, talk to your customers, because realistically, if we're talking about switching to digital processes in international trade, it takes both sides of that transaction to make a change. So talk to the people that you do business with. And the truth is, us on the technology provider side of things, the banking side of things, we're here to enable your transactions. So talk to your counterparties, talk about change, make a decision, and move forward. That's the best that I can say on that topic.
Thank you, Aaron. Dan.
Yeah, I think there's a number of great, you talk to your bank, there's a number of marketplaces right now, like Marco Polo Network, to allow bank corporates to come in and test things out before they do a try-buy to see if the value is there. This wasn't around a long time ago. So if you don't know where to start, talk to your bank, or just look for these marketplaces, and we could help you figure out if these are solutions for you to help you digitize and take advantage of some of these new technologies.
And thank you. And last not but the least, what are the word of wisdom for the small to mid-sized enterprises, or for that matter, even large? Your words.
Yeah, I would say, educate yourself, understand what's available, what's out there, both from a technical perspective, as well as there's a lot of programs now that are really focused, certainly on lower end of market, and the sustainability of those supply chains. So educate, and what everyone else said, partner with your suppliers, your bank, your tech providers, because once you educate, you can ask them the right questions and provide the right solutions to help your viability.
Very, very well said. My panelists, it is truly the privilege to have this conversation. And I'll tell you, this is our 5 to 6 years that we've been on this blockchain panel that I have a privilege to moderate and lead these things from the center. It is truly, I see an immense groundswell, immense opportunity. I'm bullish, the post-COVID, the adaptability and acceptance curve will diffuse much faster than we would have anticipated. And I thank you all for playing an incredible role in this space to drive digital innovations. Thanks again.